So a few things, as always. Shmuel emails. We are speaking about Birkas Kohanim after Ne'ilah, and after Shkia, Ne'ilah and Yom Kippur, and that's why people say they would do Ne'ilah before Shkia, so they could recite it then. Shmuel calls my attention to the fact that in the Maharil is the basis for Minhag Ashkenaz. If you look in the section dealing with Shachris of Yom Kippur, number 10, it says that if Ne'ilah continues into the night, nevertheless, Olim HaKohanim L'Duchen, that the Kohanim still duchens. And then he explains why, because we would think that duchening is like the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, it's only done during the day. So he says it's like if you begin doing the avoda, if you can continue. Like if you start with the carbon beforehand, even if it's then continues. If you like threw the blood before Shkias Achama, then you can offer it even after. When it gets the whole night, you can offer it. So he compared. So they compare that to duchening. Not duchening is like the avoda, so it should be in the day. But he says it's. I guess duchening. It's all part of the davening, so it continues. That's what he says. You can check that out. Okay, I said last class. We had Rabbi Beckhofer, and I'm not sure what the context was, but I used the expression chamor nosei sfarim, a donkey that carries books. So one of you helpfully wrote in that appears first in. Let me show it to you here. Hold on a second. It appears in the Chovos Levavos. So let me show you something here. And indeed, it does appear in the Chovos Levavos. Here it is. And I wrote it down here, I think. I don't want to go. Oh, yeah. It's uh, section 4, Service of God. Okay. If you look in number 28, it says it here that the beginners. They don't know the meaning of the words. At the most, there it says "B'tchunat chamor nosei sfarim." This is the translation of who was it? I think Yehuda ibn Tibon, as I recall, the translator of Chovos Levavos. However, I have to tell you that Chovos Levavos gets it from the Quran. You see in the Quran, Surah 6, section 62. No, sorry, section 62, Surah 6, section 6. The likeness of those who are made to bear the law of Torah but would not bear it is as the likeness of an ass carrying a load of books. So therefore you see that this is taken, the Chovos Levavos is adopting an expression that appears in the Quran. But here now it gets even more interesting. Rav Yaakov Emden. Rav Yaakov Emden in his Mitpachat Sfarim points out that this expression is found in the Zohar. It's in the Zohar Chadash, and Rav Yaakov Emden says that obviously the Rav Moshe de Leon took this. He says Moshe de Leon lakach or Moshe de Leon asfaradi halashon v'hilbishbo et Sefer Zohar Khan. As he says that he took it from the Chovos Levavos b'shar avodas Elohim, and he took it and included it in the Zohar. So the fact that the Zohar uses this same, it doesn't mean the Zohar knew the Quran, obviously not. But he's saying the Zohar, and Rav Yaakov Emden didn't know about the Quran, but the Zohar knew the Chovos Levavos and is using it. That's what Rav Yaakov Emden points out. This away. And this is the thing that I mentioned before, the big passage thing I wanted to show Mel. I'll hold off on this. A lot of swearing here, but I'll hold off on that till we see Mel again. Or unless I go through this very quickly and then I'll have 5 more minutes. Okay, why? What do I want to mention? And I said, Rabbi Kelman, he always mentions the things he learns and not just him on our trips. Well, I mentioned last class that I was bringing my son back. to America from Israel. He went on Aliyah, but he still has to see his grandparents. And okay, and how it was a long journey, 3 days. One day to go down, and fortunately, he didn't go to Jordan because those people were stranded. But he made one day to go to Eilat, stay overnight, to go then to Taba, not Sharm el Sheikh, to fly to Athens the next day, and then you have to wait to the another whole day because it's too late to fly to from Athens. So then the next day, fly to Frankfurt and then fly to America. So 3 whole days. Okay, but it's worth it. So I was looking now about food because it's 2 whole days to go without hot food. Who knows if you get on the airplane? So I looked up. I wanted to know, is there kosher food in the Frankfurt airport? And when I mean kosher food, I mean like you get in London, sandwiches, salami, good stuff. Uh, Now, us in America, we have the unfortunate situation. Well, it's a fortunate situation that we have hashgacha on so many things. It's probably 75% of things that don't have cheese and meat have some hashgacha. You try to find an ice cream that doesn't have hashgacha. I mean, it's unbelievable. But therefore, people are of the mistaken assumption, that a thing that doesn't have hashgacha is not kosher. So, for example, if you're in a supermarket and you pick up an item that doesn't have hashgacha, immediately people say, "Oh, it's not kosher." When really what they should say is, we don't know if it's kosher, therefore you don't buy it. This ethnocentrism, if you want to call it, means that you think about this. So what do people do? They didn't keep kosher 50 years ago before this laws. What do people do in Europe? They don't have hashgachas. They don't keep kosher. So of course it's nonsense. So what we learned on our trip. So let me show you if you Google it, it's so interesting how Americans and Israelis are so ignorant about something. So let me show you some things here. So I was looking up, again, I was looking for sandwiches or something. So, I get to a website, Torah Stone. Good news for travelers flying to Frankfurt Airport. What did they do? This is great. They put in, it's already 6 years ago, 7 years ago, this nice snack machine. You can get your Bisley, whatever. It talks about how Frankfurt Airport is one of the busiest in the world, 70 million passengers a year. It says the airport is one of the major hubs for connecting flights, etc. To this date, that has posed a problem for kosher observing Jewish passengers who had no access to kosher food in the airport. Wow. Whole big airport, no kosher food. And then I found like 10 different sites that say this. I'll just show you another one. So I don't even know which is one of these great kosher restaurants. It's one of these websites. I just Googled it. I don't have Facebook. So someone asks, from this year, what's kosher at the airport in Frankfurt? Interested in general. Things you can buy in addition to the kosher vending machine. So here you get the answer. Halacha Moshe Sinai, coffee, fresh fruit. That's about it. Okay, and I'm sure if you ask this person, they would say, well, of course, because there's nothing under hashgacha. So then my question will be, well, what about the Jews who live in Germany? What are they supposed to eat? You think you live in most places, they don't have kosher stores? Well, as all of us know who travel, that's not how it works in Europe. So, for instance, if you go online, you can find there's actually kosher lists in these countries. In fact, in Germany, you have the Vadha Kashrus of Germany here. And by the way, this is the mainstream Orthodox. There's also another kosher list for, I guess, what we'd call the more Haredi, right wing. So this is simple kashrus, where you can get ice creams and chocolates and everything because it's not Chol Yisrael. But then they have another list, the Mahadran list. And then they have something here for those products which actually, come from America elsewhere that have hashgacha on it. But and he says this is becoming more popular now in Europe and in Germany. But basically, nothing really has hashgacha on it. Though I can tell you, when I was in Mexico last week, I saw M&Ms. Even though they're made in Mexico, they still have the OU. The point is as follows: Americans assume that you always need these hashgachas. So my answer to the question is, what can you eat in the Frankfurt Airport? There's a whole lot you can eat in the Frankfurt Airport. All you have to do is look at the kosher list and you see there's plenty of food you can eat there. There's even a kosher app that many people use, which lists loads of products that aren't even on these various lists. So the idea that you're going through Frankfurt Airport and the only thing you can eat are the Bisley in the little machine there is sheker muchlat. By the way, I'll tell you, Americans don't realize this also. You can eat, drink Coke anywhere you go in the world. It's only under hashgacha in America and Israel, and I think now in Mexico. There's no hashgacha in Germany, no hashgacha in Italy, no hashgacha in Coke in China, in Tunisia, in South Africa. But we know that they send they have nemonos because they're not changing the secret ingredient, and therefore that's what everyone relies on. But okay, I just it's so interesting. And Rabbi Kelman, we know this now because of our travels that everywhere you go, you just have to speak to the local rabbanim, and they will tell you what you can and can't eat. And I can tell you, and by the way, it's not just me telling you, although I've been telling my group this for years because I've asked the local rabbis. But if you go on the Tzohar list in Israel, they tell everyone when you go to Europe, you can eat Magnum bars. They've checked it out. All the Magnum ice cream bars you can eat. So next time you're in Frankfurt Airport, you can eat the Magnum bars. Okay, Mel is not with us, so I'm going to postpone this, and I'm going to tell Mel that he missed it. He always he'll listen later, but I want to do it when he's alive. Let us pick up. If you recall, the last thing, oh, so someone says Shiner, Istanbul has a kosher vending machine. Yes, it does. I know that because I was supposed to go to Istanbul and it was canceled 2 hours before I was supposed to go. Long story. Basically, I was supposed to go to Syria. That was the whole, I don't know if I mentioned this with that group that went, but my wife, Motzei Shabbos, the Uber is coming in another hour. She put her foot down. I don't know what happened over Shabbos, and fortunately, the flight was refundable, and I didn't go, but they went. In fact, one of our listeners, Yehuda, he went, and Rabbi Lopatin led it, and whatever. So I was all set to be in Istanbul and for a few days, and we'll go back there. But yes, it has a kosher vending machine. The last thing we did, if you recall, uh, the discovery I made, which I think is a significant and fascinating discovery of what Rav Shimon Shkop said at the opening, not at the opening of Yeshiva Sherbitza Ochanan. What it was the opening of this building. They had a big celebration. Here you see, um, and here's a bigger picture of it. This is the old. This is from, as you can see, earlier in the century, 20th century. But if you want to see what it looks like now, here it is. That's the old building, 100 years old almost now. And the picture with Rav Shimon was taken in front of that building. So he spoke about how, Torah will be primary, but there's also a place for a college. And that the Torah should be reflected in everything they do at the college. So I think that's a very significant idea quoted by Rav Shimon, and hopefully why you will now learn about it and they'll include it. Okay, so he's coming to America and he's to raise money, and then he decides to stay in America. What happened was the Meitcheter Igor, Rav Polachek had passed away, and then Dr. Revel asked Rav Shimon to become Rosh Yeshiva, and he agreed. So was he abandoning his yeshiva in Grodno? The answer is no, because we are told that he was given assurances, that is by philanthropists, that if he remained in the United States, the future of his yeshiva would be guaranteed. And his grandson-in-law, of Zelig Epstein, who wrote an article in the yeshiva, in a book edited by Shmuel Kalman Mirsky called Mosto Torah Be'Europa, Torah Institutions in Europe. After the Holocaust, all these institutions were memorialized, in which he mentions that he also thought he could help influence American Jewry. Now, he doesn't remain. He does go back, and I'll explain why in a few minutes, but let me just clarify it first, that he returns at the end of the summer of 1929. So he was in the U.S. around the end of August, he returned. So he was in the U.S. around a little over 8 months. We came in December and he left in at the end of August. So over 8 months. Now, if you look at the Yeshiva University, they have a page here, a website here, of all the Rosh Yeshiva, except for I always forget his name. You'll remind me of him, the author of the Shah, or Volk, or Shmuel Lazer Volk. If you notice, you go down here, all the Rosh Yeshiva, his name was spelled with a W. He has been deleted from the institutional memory for reasons we spoke about, and there's probably people listening to us who are his Talmidim. They say that he had the second most popular shiur after Rav Soloveitchik. Maybe others will say it was Rav Paleoff, the great Rav Paleoff, but Shmuel Weiser Volk was certainly very popular. But you have here, they include Rav Shimon Shkop, they give his biography here, and they say that um, where is it? He says he became Rosh Yeshiva at at RIETS, where he taught for 1 year. This is not true. He did not teach for 1 year. And I have to tell you that I don't know in those days if RIETS had shiurim in the summer. Because if they didn't have shiurim in the summer, then he really only taught what we would call the spring semester. But maybe there were shiurim in the summer. I want to read you something from Rakefet's book on Revel on page 119, and it says that in the press release announcing in March of 1929, he officially becomes Rosh Yeshiva only March of 1929. I'll explain to you in a minute. So this is another mistake on the YU website. He wasn't a Rosh Yeshiva for a year, but Dr. Revo put out in his press release, the coming of the Gaon, Rav Shimon Shkop, to the yeshiva is not only a matter of great importance to the yeshiva, but it's an important event for all of American Jewry. He will, with the help of God, aid in planting the seeds of Torah in this land, just as he propagated the study of Torah in our old home. And then it continues, where he says, in August of 1922, August 22nd, 1929, Rav Shimon Shkop writes to Dr. Revel. Dr. Revel, already he had decided he's returning to Europe. And Revel and Rabbi Margulies, the Ramaz, tried to convince him. They sent him a telegram in Miami Beach, where he was, I guess, raising money. And he writes to them, when I arrived here, Miami Beach, I was given your telegram at which you requested that I continue in the yeshiva. It surprises me that you still ask that I do so. Haven't I already told you many times that I cannot fulfill this request? It's my fondest wish that God should help me return to my yeshiva in Grodno before Rosh Hashanah. May the good Lord aid you in selecting the proper man to head the yeshiva. Now, the proper man was Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, who was supposed to already come, but problems prevented him from coming. But already, so you see here, by August, he's convinced, and he has already told them a number of times that he's returning. So what happens between March and August to change everything? Let me also, Rakefet on page 176 and 177 quotes also something interesting, that the graduates of Yeshivas Rabbi Yitzhak formed a new rabbinic organization. Some of them were members of Agudas Rabbani, which is the old-fashioned, old-time rabbis, but others formed a new organization of for the musmachim of RIETS. And Rakefet quotes from the program. This is April 1st, 29. It began with an address by Revo and a shiur by Rav Shimon. So you see, he was very much involved in this Yeshivas Rabbi Yitzhak in this organization. So what happened? Actually, before even telling you what happens, let me read you two other things. The students of Yeshivas Rabbi Yitzhak, that is the smicha, the students studied in yeshiva, not smicha, just in the yeshiva. Some study for smicha also. They published a journal called Heidenu. You can see it on Otzer Chachma. I should have checked. I'll tell you, because not every one of you have Otzer Chachma. So the ones who don't, I'm checking it right now. You can see a couple issues on HebrewBooks.org, but the big thing is the more issues you find it on Otzer Chachma. So if you look right after Shimon comes, it says in Teves, Tafresh Pei Tes. So that would be Shimon comes in December. This is January Teves. You have a whole article about called Rav Shimon Yeshiva. The name is Rav Chaim Grossbard. I've met Grossbards over the years. I assume it's from the same family. And he speaks about, first of all, who Rav Shimon Shkop is, how great Rav Shimon, and that he's now going to bring his method of learning into the yeshiva. And then the very last paragraph, um, I mean, he mentions that Dr. Revel invited Rav Shimon Lahartzot Shirav Yeshiva to give shiurim b'chol yemot hachoref, pamayim b'shavua. That he invited him to give shiurim twice a week in the winter. And he says, we all look forward to this. But that doesn't make him a Rosh Yeshiva. He's just giving shiurim. If you look, the same Grossbard writing in Hedenu in Nisan. So Nisan figure April, maybe March. I just want to see if it gives a more exact date here. Hold on, I'm checking my computer as we speak. This is, for those who want to check, this is Hedenu volume 18. So you see that they were quite active. Yeah, this is the same person writing. Chaim Grossbard. Okay. So what does he say? I think this is interesting. As far as I know, no one's really noticed this. He says that only now he's saying in Nisan that it's Huchraz mitam hanhala, that the yeshiva has declared that Rav Shimon has agreed to the invitation of the yeshiva to be a Rosh Yeshiva Kavua Yeshivatenu. So originally, when he's writing in January, Rav Shimon agreed to give shiurim in the winter twice a week. But now, by Pesach, Rav Shimon has agreed to the request to be a permanent Rosh Yeshiva. So here, now you have to know what changed between April and the summer. And then he goes on, this Chaim Grossberg, he says that this important event has a national significance, and all of American Jewry should be pleased with this, because the Rav Shimon's influence is not just going to be on the yeshiva, but it's going to be from the whole outside of the yeshiva for the entire Nishmata v'Yeshuta shel Kol Hayadut Amerikai Kula, for all of American Jewry. I would only add, you mean all of Orthodox American Jewry, but that's what he means. Uh, Two other things I'll just mention to you. In Rav Shurkin's book called Meged Givot Olam, Volume 2, if you look on pages 122 to 123, it says when Rav Shimon decided, this is what he's reporting from, I think from his father. It actually doesn't say, but a lot of these things are reported from his father. He says that when Rav Shimon sent a telegram to the Grodno Yeshiva that he was remaining in America, and by the way, that wasn't a problem. His son was already teaching at the yeshiva, Rav Moshe Mordechai um, uh, Shkop. So he says when he sent a telegram that he's staying in America, because that's what he thought at the time, he reports that the yeshiva students took off their shoes and sat on the floor as if they're in mourning. And then it says when he changed his mind and returned to Grodno, they met him and they brought him in a carriage with horses, and two of the students, were at the front of this and pulled the carriage. One of them was Rav Gusman. Since I mentioned uh, Rabbi Shurkin, let me call your attention to something else he said, which I should have mentioned earlier because it refers to when he was in Grodno already. But if he wrote another book called Hararei Kedem. Now, this book Hararei Kedem, I got to show you this since I mentioned this. uh, I, I didn't have this when I didn't think about this when I prepared it, but it just hit me. So I have to show it to you. I just want to confirm that it's this way. Yes. Okay. Let me share my screen with you. Um, Hold on. And this, I just checked. It appears in all three volumes. Rav Shurkin is one of these right-wing students. He's now with Torah Moshe, Rabbi Meiselman, who came to learn with the Rav. There was a Rabbi Ilson. You had, I think, a couple others as well. So he publishes a sefer of chidushim, of stuff from Rav Soloveitchik, Torah learning. And look how he describes Rabbi Soloveitchik on the cover of the book. Well, it's the same in the Sefer as Hari Kedem. Kedusha Torah of Soloveitchik, going Rissa Bezois of Soloveitchik, Av Bastin of Boston, chief rabbi of Boston. Okay, now look, when Rav Soloveitchik was first brought to Boston, the shuls that brought him did give him this title, Chief Rabbi of Boston. But the truth is, he never was Chief Rabbi of Boston. There was a group of shuls that brought him in. They called him. There was a lot of other rabbis in Boston, and they certainly did not regard him as the chief rabbi. In fact, if you know the history, all the problems Rav Soloveitchik had, it's terrible to say it, but it's true. It didn't come from the non-Orthodox rabbis. It came from the other Orthodox rabbis. Rav Soloveitchik tried to make, there was Hafkerus, chaos in the kashrus world. And he tried to organize it into some system, and that was going to have problems on their parnassas and things. So he met with a lot of opposition from the other rabbis, including one in particular who became really an Eloi, a Gaon. Um, but obviously, Rav Soloveitchik is known for 50 years, right? Or 40 years. He was a Rosh Hashiva, and he ordained more people than any other rabbi in history. That's what makes him that's what he's known for. Boston is sort of in the backwaters. People live in Boston. It's interesting, but his major achievement is as, the Rosh Hashiva, the intellectual leader at Yeshiva Rebbe Chanan. But, in the right-wing world, I guess that's a problem. But it's so foolish because everyone knows he was a Rebbe. It's not like some of these other people where they don't realize that they taught, let's say, at YU, so they can cover it up. But everyone knows from Soloveitchik, he didn't just teach there. He was Mr. RIETS. I mean, he was the most important person there by far. So who are you covering it up for? You're not fooling anyone. I don't understand this. Be that as it may, before you get too upset with what he's trying to do here, because on the one hand, it is outrageous, but on the other hand, look what he's trying to do. What he's trying to do is he's trying to bring Rav Soloveitchik's Torah into the Haredi world. And he thinks that perhaps by not putting on the front there, Rosh Hashiva, Shiva Chanan, it makes it a little more kosher. And so in that sense, it's a good thing. You're bringing in the Torah of Rav Soloveitchik. Why should it not be found in those worlds as well? I know someone who gave a Daf Yomi shiur in Borough Park, and he would quote from Rav Soloveitchik, from the Chidushim that Rabbi Reichman and others published, and he would refer to him as, he'd say, the Brisker Rav. Now, on the one hand, it's not true because he's not the Brisker Rav. Everyone knows who the Brisker Rav is. But on the other hand, if you want to stretch the truth a little, he is a Rav and he's also from Brisk, the Brisker. And he's recording Brisker Torah. And his approach was if in Borough Park he mentioned Rav Soloveitchik, they wouldn't want to hear that. So you say, the Brisker Rav, it's okay. So what does Rav Shurkin say in his book, Harei Kedem, Volume 1, page 407? He says that, let's see. Here it is. He hears from his father. His father told me that in Grodno, because his father was in Grodno, I guess, this in Bein Hazmanim they would go. We spoke about how they went to the resorts, not the resorts, the summer places, the dachas, and Rav Shimon was very upset. He saw them, Americans, of course, riding horses. And yeshiva students don't ride horses, but look what it says. That they would go swimming there in the river. Biyachad im Rabam Rav Shimon Shkop. They would go swimming together with Rav Shimon. And he says, and this did not cause them to lose any of their ha'aratza, any of their esteem for Hamarbitz Torah Hachi Gadol B'Yeshivat Europa, for the greatest expositor, the greatest spreader of Torah study in any yeshiva in Europe. Rav Shimon was the greatest Rosh Yeshiva of his time. And yet by going swimming together with him, they didn't lose any of their great respect for him, even though they saw him among them as one of the other people. So that I think is significant. That I think many Rosh Yeshiva would feel, that they too can go swimming, but not to go swimming with the young guys. It's there has to be a sense of distance, just like some of them wouldn't play ball with the students, things like that. We see Rav Shimon had no problem going swimming with the students. Okay, so let's return now. Rav Shimon's in America. He's teaching at YU. It's not YU. I don't call it YU. It only becomes Yeshiva University in 1945. It's Yeshiva College, but he's not in the college, of course. He's in, or the Teachers Institute. He's in RIETS, so let's call it the Yeshiva. Um, but he's also raising money. He has this responsibility for the Grodno Yeshiva. So while he's in America, he's also going to be raising money. So obviously during the summer months, during the breaks, he can travel a lot. That's what he's doing in August in Miami Beach. That's why I wonder if there was any shirim at all in the summer there. Because if that's the case, if there weren't shirim there, then he really was only a Rosh Yeshiva for a couple months, and he only was teaching at Yeshiva Sherbet Zochanan, what, January, February, March, April, May, 5 months, let's say, maybe June, 6 months. Um, but he traveled all over. Now, one of the places he traveled, and I wonder if this book, Torah Vakshumi Pihu, would have included this if it recognized what it was referring to. Sometimes these Haredi books, they don't realize it and they don't leave things out, and that's good because uh, the fact that they don't leave it out helps us. On page 358, he has a letter to this individual. Let's see. Oops, no, sorry, wrong page. Delete. We don't need to see this. We just saw that. We want to see. Here it is. Okay. A letter to this individual. No, not that individual. This individual. Cyrus Adler, great American educator, Jewish religious leader, and scholar, born in, of all places, Arkansas, Van Buren, Arkansas. Now, this person, Cyrus Adler, is such a significant person. Just if you look at what he did, uh, he became, forget his list of affiliations. He served at the same time. This is from the pen. It has his archives. He was president at the same time of Dropsy College and JTS. How are you president of two institutions? Dropsy College was in Philadelphia, an advanced institution for Jewish studies. He also, look at all the affiliations he had. American Academy of Jewish Research, American Jewish Committee, Jewish Historical Society, Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. That's where Shimon came to about, the joint. They distributed all this money. But look at all that, even the Boy Scouts of America he's involved in, and trustee, board of directors, editor of JQR at the Jewish Quarterly Review, the Jewish Welfare Board. I try to avoid all these things people ask me to. Maybe I should do some more because I need time to do my research. But look at everything. So a very significant person. Well, since he's very much involved in the joint and they're distributing money to yeshivas in Israel, obviously Shimon has to go to him to ask him. So if you read on page 358, he writes to the person who's very active in the Jewish world, Dr. Adler Shlita, and he says this is from 1929, and Adler, just to remind ourselves of this, he's president of JTS from I think 19 after Schechter, so whatever, so I guess 15 or so until his death in 1940. So Rav Shimon says to him, with great honor, I was honored to meet you, Bilishkato, at your office, Asher, at your office, which is in the seminarium, in the seminary, which my good friend Professor Davidson, remember Professor Israel Davidson? We spoke about him. That the letters, all those letters that Rosh Shimon writes to Davidson, and one of the letters was about his son. If Davidson can help him, get a PhD. And then he says, I told you about the Yeshara Torah, the yeshiva, and how difficult it is financially, and that you should try to give us some money from the budget that you're in charge of, etc., etc. Look, there's nothing crazy or anything here. It's to be expected. But I think that in the Haredi world, that Rav Shimon would even step foot in the seminary. Now, really, lots of people step foot in them. Gedol Yisrael have stepped foot in the seminary to go to the library and use it. But here you see that he went to see Cyrus Adler at his office at the seminary. In the book Torah Yavakshu, which I'm misquoting from, on page 309, it has the picture, the famous picture here of him, which I showed you last class, of taken from standing in front of the new building, Yeshiva College building, Yeshiva Yerucham building, and it does say on this page that while he was there, Masar kama shiurim b'yeshivas Rabbinic Zochanan. It says that he gave a few shiurim at RIETS. It doesn't say the truth. They want to cover this up, I guess, that he actually was appointed officially a Rosh Yeshiva. It has an interesting story here that during his time in New York, someone came to get him to bring him to the yeshiva, and they gave him money to bring him in a cab. And Rav Shimon says, "Well, how'd you get here?" And he said, "On the train." So he said, "So then I'll go on the train. Why should I? This is yeshiva's money. I shouldn't use their money." There's also a story with him. I'll tell you the story next time because I forgot to grab the book. The book's over there. I'll tell you the story next time. A very similar story to him and the Meitcheter, which I think means that it's not really about him. It's about the Meitcheter, but I'll do that next time. Now, there's no question that Rav Shimon intended on remaining in America. He was not a young man. It's not easy to travel back. He can raise money for the yeshiva. His son is running the yeshiva. Why does he have to be there anymore? He was convinced to return to Grodno. So the question is, why was he convinced, and who convinced him? If you go to the, let's see, I love this website because oops, I mentioned already the website, the Kvarim website. Is this it? Which really it's not really only about graves, although it helps that. I mean, if you look on the side here, recent comments, you see people are making comments. Anyone who searches for a different gadol, you can find that people are up to date. They're updating about these different. Here's someone. He's my great grandfather, trying to get info, etc., etc. Now, and you read why this person? His name is Baruch Amsel. I think he's the son of Meir Amsel, who edited the journal Hamaor. And he says that there's many books identifying Kivrei Tzaddikim in Eretz Yisrael and in Europe, but there's no place identifying the Tzaddikim in America. Why do you have to go to Europe? You can find great Admorim and Rabbanim living in America. So that's the project. He says many do not realize that right here in the U.S. and Canada, you can find the final resting places of many Admorim and Rabbanim. So Rav Shimon wasn't buried here, but if you look who ended up here, now why they put him in here, I don't know because he was here. But most of the people they have are Americans, and they have his son here. I'm not sure why they put Rav Shimon here as well, but maybe they expanded it to include others. But as far as I know, they don't have rabbis who had no connection to America. And it says here, Rosh Yeshiva Torah and Rabbi Yochanan. Now, the last comment I saw on the page says as follows, from the owner of the site, Baruch Amsel. He says, this past Shabbos, this is from 4 years ago, I was sitting with Rav Yankel Bergman of KGH. I don't know what KGH is. Maybe someone could tell us. Rabbi Bergman taught in Sha'arei Torah, Kew Garden Hills, Kew Gardens for many years. I'm close with Rav Zelig Epstein. He related to me the following in his name, that is from Rav Zelig Epstein. The world thinks that Rav Shimon went back to Europe because of all the nasty letters he was getting from Europe, especially from Rav Yerucham, and I'll explain what this refers to soon. That's not why he went back. He loved America. He loved the yeshiva, and he especially loved the American Bacharim. He went back because his daughter-in-law, Rebbetzin Sarah Henya, was a frummer and hated it here in America and was constantly begging him to go back. Now, Baruch Amsel speaking. Apparently, Rav Shimon came here with his son Ramosha Mordechai and daughter-in-law to help look after him. So I can tell you that he gets it a little half right. Ramosha Mordechai and the daughter-in-law never came to America. But he does get it half right, as I'll tell you. And how do I know this? Because, as I said, Rav Zelig Epstein published an article on Grodno Yeshiva and on Rav Shimon. And the truth is, so you could see how telephone, how Baruch Amsel heard it from someone who heard it from Rav Zelig, uh, and somehow it got mixed up. What Rav Zelig Epstein actually says is that his daughter-in-law, the wife of Moshe Mordechai, refused to move to the U.S., where the religious future of her children would be endangered. So the meaning is that if Rav Shimon remained in the United States, what he's saying is that Ramosha Mordechai Shkop would have felt he had to come to America. That would have been the plan. And they could have set him up at RIETS or another yeshiva. But it was the wife who refused to come because it wasn't religious enough in America. She was worried about her children. So it's not that she insisted on going back, but she refused to come here. Now that's really not the reason why he he went back, I mean, Zelig says that, I guess, I mean, the implication of Rose Zelig is saying that if he remained here, Ramosha Mordechai would have had to come because he would have to take care of him in his old age or something like that. But in any event, we know that there's a lot more to it, as we will see now. I just want to share with you that. Okay, I'll get to that later. Well, we know he's in America and he's intent to come. Rav Zelig says he loves America and he thinks he can accomplish a lot here. The students from Grodno write to him that they need him. He has to come back. I see Mel is with us. Mel, I'll get to at the end, 5 minutes. I'm going to share what I wanted to share at the beginning, but I wanted you on, so I'll share it at the end. Furthermore, we're told the Chafetz Chaim and Rav Chaim Ozer, Grzinski, the great Rav Chaim Ozer, said that he has to come back. The yeshiva won't survive without him. Yes, true, he's raising the money for the yeshiva, but they need him there as the spiritual leader of it. But I now want to read to you. There's another version, which I'll also tell you from Kamenetsky. I don't know if I'll get to it today, as to why he left America. That you've never heard, I'm certain. What you've heard so far is what you've heard so far is the standard thing. But I want to now tell you. Remember what Baruch Amsel said, that his return to Europe had nothing to do with what Yerucham said. So now let me share with you what Rav Yerucham said. And yes, it is a little offensive to us fans of Yeshivas Rabbi Yitzhak Hanan, but it gives you an insight into how they thought of Yeshivas Rabbi Yitzhak Hanan in Europe. And it also gives you an insight into what Rav Shimon was doing when he not only stays to be Rosh Yeshiva, but the way he expresses his love and his support for what, I don't want to say love, let's say, but his support and his identification with Yeshivas Rabbi Yitzhak Hanan opening a college, and how in America, he's not saying we should do this in Lithuania, but that in America, this is what you need to do. This is how we're going to bring Torah to people in America. We're going to give them a college, because everyone in America has to go to college, and we're going to have a yeshiva with it, connected to it. In Europe, they didn't go to college. In Lithuania, they weren't going to college. So listen to what Rav Yerucham is Rav Yerucham Levovitz, Mashgiach of the Mir Yeshiva, one of the great names in Musar. Okay, Rav Shimon's not a Musar figure. He's a Rosh Yeshiva, he's a Lamdan, but he wasn't opposed to Musar, and he obviously had a relationship with Rav Yerucham. So Rav Yerucham, if you look in it's called Das Chachma O Musar. They put together in a few volumes his Musar writings, volume 3, pages 272 and on. I want to summarize for you what Rav Yerucham writes to Rav Shimon. And when you think about how Rav Shimon was the greatest Rosh Yeshiva, that Rav Yerucham could write to him this way, it's a little shocking. He apologizes, but he does it anyway. But I guess that's the job of a Musar teacher. They're just like the prophet Nassan Navi walks into King David to give him Musar. So too, the Musar teacher is supposed to walk into the Rosh Yeshiva's office and give them Musar if they deserve it. In fact, it's famous. Rav Avram Schenker, another great Musar figure. He died very young, I think age 42. So people don't know much about him. He's buried in Murano, Italy, because he had to go there for health reasons. But it's known that and he's a young whippersnapper compared to Rav Chaim Brisker, the great Rav Chaim. He gave Rav Chaim Musar. And So that's what the Dubno Magid gave Musar to the Vilna Gaon. He told him, don't just be a tzaddik in your own little corner. Go out there. So this is what Rav Yerucham writes to Rav Shimon. He says, it's a couple days that I've heard this news, which I do not believe. When he says I don't believe it, he does believe it, but he's wanting to show how shocked he is. So he says, I can't believe it, chas v'shalom, that you agreed to remain, to abandon us, lazov otanu, and your holy place, and to abandon your flock as a tson below roa, as a flock without a shepherd, and establish yourself be'eretz America. I've heard this. I can't believe it. He says, I'm a nobody compared to the great, Rav Shimon. Who am I to come and dispute with you? And who am I, such a meaningless person, an insect that you're going to even, and that you would listen to me. Nevertheless, I have to speak my piece. And I ask you beforehand, mechila uslicha. I ask you forgiveness that that I'm mixing into things that have nothing to do with me. But nevertheless, but it's true. It's not because this isn't about me. It's about us. And what I'm going to tell you relates to us in the plural, the whole Torah world of Lithuania. And he says to him, in my opinion, and what I'm going to tell you now is pashut, is obvious. Um, and he says, I don't even know, how to begin. It's so obvious, but let me begin. He says, uh, even if everything that you think of Shimon is correct, that is in your mind, why you're staying in America, because you can raise money for the Grodno Yeshiva, you can have a great influence on American Jewry, etc. He says, in my opinion, Ladati Hapshuta Vadala, is EFSHAR. It's impossible for you, Al Pi Din, in accordance with Jewish law, B'shum Ofen, within any way, to leave a Makom Torah, to Lazov Makom, to leave your place of Torah, without asking permission of Urim V'Tumim. Um, without Shegat Urim V'Tumim. Now, we don't have an Urim V'Tumim. So what he's saying is that when you have established yourself in a place of Torah, you can certainly not leave. I don't, he doesn't mean here Urim V'Tumim, that asking, let's say, the Gedolim or anything like that. I want to pull this up for a second. That's not what he means. Um, but um, I think he what he's saying here is that it's so impossible to leave. It's so obvious that you have to stay where you are. Um, oh, then he continues on. Sorry, I was cut off the page I had. He says all the avodas hakodesh, which is on our shoulders, is God's service. God has given us this ability to teach Torah. We've accepted upon ourselves. And who then can, abandon this unless you're certain that this is God's will, like it's from the Urim V'Tumim. And then he says, I'm going to tell you a story. Okay, so what's his story um, that he tells him? Okay, hold on, let me get back to our screen here. He says, um, when I was in Lithuania, I thought of me. But by the way, Rosh Yeshiva left. We know that they left. He left tells. He left. I mean, so what? I mean, so as we'll see, the issue isn't leaving per se, because in Lithuania they did leave. The issue, as we'll see, is leaving Lithuania for America. That's going to be the problem. He says, when I was in Lithuania, I was thinking of leaving Mir to go to Kelm. Kelm, I mean, he does compare it, what he's saying, to Lithuania, but you'll see the big issue is America. And he says that I saw from heaven that things were keeping me from, so I did the Gorel Hayadua. You know what the Gorel Hayadua? That's the Gorel Hagra. You open up the Torah and you find a pasuk, and the pasuk teaches you something. So he says, I don't need to go in interest of time. The pasuk that he found, a pasuk in Shemos, that you might think it's not like one of these obvious ones where he says like "do not leave." It's a pasuk of the staves stuck in the aron. That's but he derived from there that we the Torah scholars are like the ones who carry the Aron HaTorah, like we carry God's ark, and therefore just like you can't separate those things, we can't be separated, etc. It's not so important his drasha, but he says. And this is where it gets interesting. He says that I think, and he says again, I apologize, forgive me for saying this, but are in, you basically are in the place of the famous story of Zachariah ben of Kilus. Well, here's the story. I mean, it's amazing what Rav Yerucham is saying to him. He's saying to him that you're in the place. He says, "Forgive me if I say about you chas v'sholom, but that you are in this place of that the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed because of him." So let me show you now what he's referring to. Famous story here, which has had so many people have written on it. So let's see, where is the story here? Uh, Here's the story. Okay, it's in Gittin. Uh, the story is that the emperor sent the story Kamsa Bar Kamsa. The emperor sent a calf for the Beis Hamikdash, and Bar Kamsa is coming. He makes a blemish on the calf's upper lip. Some say he made a blemish in a different place. Okay, so the halacha is it's a blemish, but according to not, the Gentiles, it's not a blemish. So, but when Bar Kamsa, for us, it's a problem. When Bar Kamsa brought the animal to the temple, the priest will not sacrifice it since it's blemished. But they couldn't explain, how do you explain to the emperor we can't offer it? Then it says, the sages sought to sacrifice the animal. Nevertheless, after all, the emperor sent it. Why? Due to the imperative to make peace with the government. But Rav Zachariah ben Avkolos said to them, if you offer this, people will say that blemished animals can be sacrificed. But sages said, if we don't sacrifice it, then we have to prevent Bar Kamsa from reporting this to the emperor. So they wanted to kill Bar Kamsa. But Zachariah said, you can't kill him, because if you kill him, people will derive halacha that if you make a blemish on a sacrificial animal, you're to be killed. In other words, the sages were speaking in terms of the real world, what you do. And Rav Zachariah was speaking just in terms of technical halacha, that how could you offer it? It has a blemish, and how could you kill him? Because then people will think you're chayiv misa for that. Um, it says, and the Gemara concludes, as a result, they had nothing. Bar Kamsa's slander was accepted by authorities, and consequently, the war between the Jews and the Romans began. And what does the Gemara say? Rav Yochanan says, the excessive humility of Rav Zachariah ben Avkolos destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from the land. And that's the lesson from that is not to be like Rav Zachariah. Sometimes you're too much of a stickler and you don't see the broader picture. You don't see the trees, the forest. All you see are the trees, and it leads to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. That's what they derive from this. By the way, people derive other things as well from it. The Maharshal, Rav Shlomo Luria, derives from this that you can, because he thinks that Rav Zachariah is right in all this, and he says you derive from this that you can't lie, even for you can't lie in Torah matters, no matter what, even to save your life. Now, I mean, it's very strange because the implication is that Rav Zachariah is wrong. Rav Moshe Feinstein points out that we know Rav Zachariah, we don't accept his view. What's the proof? Haraya, open up any sefer printed 100 years ago. If you look to the second page, it says anytime it mentions Goy, it doesn't refer to the Goyim we live among. It means those in China and India. And everyone knows that was not meant seriously. So Rav Moshe says that's the biggest proof that there's no such concept of Ziyuf HaTorah when it comes to matters, put yourselves in danger. So, and Rav Shimon, he says to Rav Shimon that you, Rav Shimon, are in the place of Rav Zachariah here. So I think we'll need, next class, I'm going to continue with where he, hold on a second here. Next class will be in 2 weeks, obviously, but hold on a second. I just want to we're going to pick up. We'll see why he goes back to Europe, what brings him back, and then continue with his life to the end of his life in Europe. The next interesting point is the Sefer Yovel. New concept. We don't take for granted today. They need to raise money. Rav Shimon's now back in Europe. He's not in America. So how are they going to raise money? So they come up with this idea. They're going to publish a Jubilee volume. Who ever heard of a Jubilee volume? That's like a new thing. And we'll finish up with Rav Shimon's life and lots of interesting ideas, including halachic, some tshuvos of his that when he was in America. Um, Rav Gedalia Dov Schwartz's Rebbe. We'll see Rav Shimon and Rav Gedalia Dov Schwartz's Rebbe. Who knows who Rav Gedalia Dov Schwartz's Rebbe is as a young man? I think we have one person listening here who does know, but that's not that doesn't count because he's mishpacha. But I'm going to make a mark here, and we'll pick up with Rav Yerucham's letter and wait till you see what he says about Yeshivas Rebbe Tzolchanan. That's where it's a low blow, and you know that Rav Shimon did not agree with this because he thought he was doing great service teaching Torah at RIETS. And to hear the insulting way Rav Yerucham refers to it, but okay, we're used to that. I want to say before I get to the questions quickly, let me get it to Mel asked a question. I have to do this because Mel has been with us for so many years, and these other people I'll postpone to the next week, but not for Mel. So Mel said, if you recall, last class, I was speaking about, or two classes ago, a rabbi from Slobodka in my town. His name was Rabbi Chanan, and we called him Rabbi Chanan person. And he said that in Slobodka they stood up for Kriyas Torah. So I said, well, I don't know, maybe they sat down in the middle between Aliyahs, but they stood up for it. So Mel says, did I misspeak when I said that people who stand for laning sit for the brachos? And then he says, aren't you supposed to stay? Isn't halacha? You're supposed to stand for the brachos at the beginning, at least Baruch Hashem, even though he says that there are people who sit and he himself sits. But okay, so let me explain this. It is true. If you look at the Mishnah Brura in Simon Kuf Mem Vav, you have the halacha. It says in the Shulchan Aruch Kuf Mem Vav Daled, you don't need to stand when they read the Torah. And the Ramah says that there are those who stand. And the Maram, he quotes the Maram of Rothenberg. He stood, but the Mishnah Brura says. Let me read you the Mishnah Brura here. On this, maybe I should have. No, I have time to. Okay, on this thing, the Mishnah Brura says. If you look in Sif Katan Yud Ches, Mishnah Brura says, "Uveshas Amiras Baruchu." When they say Baruch Hashem and Baruch Hashem L'Kuli Alma, everyone agrees that you have to stand because that's a davar shebikdusha. It's funny because he says in the Sharat Tziyun, he quotes the Taz, El Yerabah, and then he says, Utelo Kamagin Avraham, not like the Magen Avraham. But I don't know, if you look at the Magen Avraham, he does say, I think it may be a slip of the pen, because at the end, the last comment to Magen Avraham says you don't need to stand. I'll read you the Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham says, he says, Ben Gavra LaGavra L'Kuliyama Shari Leishev, that between the aliyahs, you can sit. So that's what the Mishnah Brura is quoting from. But if you look at the prior Magen Avraham, he says differently. The prior Magen Avraham, he clarifies this, that B'shas Birkas HaTorah tzrichim hakol lamod. So I don't know, unless this is a mistake, a slip of the pen or something, because the Magen Avraham agrees. Okay, so we see that according to the Magen Avraham, according to everyone, you have to stand. And I've said in the past that, these girls come back from Israel. I don't know what they're teaching them, because the guys are all sitting and the girls stand up for the brachos, Baruch Hashem, and then sit down. Okay. But now let me explain. The Kaf HaChaim on this very same simon mentions that this is not al pi Kabbalah, and the Ari would not stand. He only would sit. And then the Kaf HaChaim says, this is on this simon in Sif, he says that V'chein nitpashet haminhag achshav ka'ari da'afilu chasidim v'anshe ma'isa ein omdim lo be'is hakriya v'lo b'nei baruch And he says the Ari loy omer afil b'niyas baruch Hashem. Okay, um, so we see already in Machokas. You want to say Ashkenazim, Sfardim? If you want to say that, fine. But we see already that the Ari didn't, so therefore, if you follow Ari, Kabbalah, you're not going to stand. But it's more than that. And now let me tell you about a book here. Do you know one of the most interesting books, Va'aleo Lo Yibol? This is by a Rabbi Stefansky. Oh, actually, Stepansky as a negationist. He was a Merkaz Arav student who got very close to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Well, I don't know, not say very close as like a colleague, but he would go constantly. He'd walk together for Shlomo Zalman Auerbach from back to shul and back and forth, and ask some questions along the way and get the answers. So like literally every single time Rav Shlomo Zalman came out of his house to shul and vice versa, and he talks about how Rav Shlomo Zalman once invited him even in for Shabbos meal. He ate there. What makes it so interesting is that people who've been Talmidim or Shlomo Zalman says it really captures him well. And the introduction has haskamos from Rav Rosenthal, who was the Rav Shari Chesed, who Rav Shlomo Zalman davened at his shul. Haskama from Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, the son-in-law, from Rav Neuwirth, the big Talmud of his, the author of Shmir Skamba Kolchasa, Rav Nebensal, and he worked with one of the sons on it. But then he includes a letter from another son of Rav Shlomo Zalman, saying, Avram Dov Bar Arbach from Tveria, don't publish this book, because who ever heard of a sefer like this? You know, my father was answering you off the cuff. This isn't correct. You shouldn't publish this. So then he explains why he publishes Haskama, which is not really Haskama. It's a warning not to do it. But he explains why I'm publishing the book, even though one of the sons told me not to. Well, because the another son told him yes, and the son and Razam Nechemia Goldberg. So this is a Haskama, non-Haskama. Now, if you look on page 60, he has a great story here, which I think puts into pure form this whole idea of Chaim Soloveitchik that he all taught us the word memeticism, mimetic. That is, we learn that before the book culture, everything was you knew how to put the tefillin on because your father told you. You didn't have to look at any book. You knew how big a shiur for Pesach was because how big your father had. The idea that you'd have a book which measures, you got to put into it's like a coloring book, but you put in the lettuce to see if it fills out. This is unimaginable in previous years. You knew because you grew up. You saw how people did it. That's mimetic. And often the mimetic tradition is at odds with the book tradition. And Rav Chaim Soloveitchik's chidush, his whole point was that after the war, the mimetic tradition can no longer hold its own. It doesn't have the assumption of legitimacy. It's being challenged by the book tradition, whereas usually the book was like a theoretical, but the practical was how people did it. Okay, so this is a great story. So he's with Rav Shlomo Zalman, and a yeshiva student comes to him and is hakin a chinik that why aren't people standing up for Baruch Hu Hashem? Don't they have to stand up? So this is what, because the Mishnah Berurah says, this is halacha. So this is what Rav Shlomo Zalman, after becoming and finally annoyed with him, Rav Shlomo Zalman says, where is it written? And then he tells him where it's written. And then Rav Shlomo Zalman says, he points out that Rav Shlomo Zalman's minhag was to sit. So Rav Shlomo Zalman says to him, quote, there are many things that it's written that you're supposed to stand, and we see that people don't stand. He says in Vayvarech David, the Ramah says to the minhag is to stand, and we don't stand. By the way, I've never been in a shul where they don't stand for Vayvarech David, but Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is telling us that in his shul in Shari Chesed they didn't stand, and I can tell you Rav Gustman said we didn't stand for it in Europe. He says in Chazaras Hashatz, the Ramah says to stand. In yeshivas they stood, but in synagogues they sat. And then he points out that Rav Shlomo Zalman also sat. And then he says as follows. This is great. In Kriyas HaTorah and in Baruch Hu, when they get an aliyah, nahagu hasheves. People are accustomed to sit. And then he says to the kid, the yeshiva student, Atal lo roeh ma shenogim, you don't see what they do? And he says, and to our great wonder, the yeshiva student still kept pressing. Isn't there still an inyan to stand for Baruch Hu of Kriyas HaTorah? And what about, and even when the person is holding the Sefer Torah, when you sit down, if there's two Sefer Torah, someone's sitting down with the Sefer Torah, and Rosh Hashanah says absolutely not, and the person who's sitting never needs to stand up. But this is the important thing. He says the man saying doesn't, the Mishnah Berurah says you have to stand. How come people aren't standing? He wants Rosh Hashanah to come out with psak. Everyone needs to stand. And Rosh Hashanah says, don't you see what people do? No one stands. That's the minhag. So what are you coming to me with the Mishnah Berurah says you're supposed to do this? So what? There's a lot of things in the books, but just look around. I don't stand. The Rav of the Shul doesn't stand. None of these Talmidei Chachamim are standing. So why are you telling us now we should make a change and stand? Our minhag of sitting is what our parents did and their parents, and that's good enough. So Mel, that's the answer. Yes, it's in the source. It's in the Mishnah Berurah, and in this new textual age, people read the Mishnah Berurah and they'll say, "Hey, you know what? We're doing wrong." And we should be standing. But the fact is that you see that the minhag of Gedol Yisrael was not to stand. And Rosh Zalman said, we don't change minhag because of what you found in the text. And look what he says. Atag lo roeh ma shnogim. You don't see what the minhag is? And again, we're not talking about a minhag in some modern Orthodox shul. We're talking about a shul of Talmidei Chachamim and Tzaddikim and Gedol Yisrael. And he says to the yeshiva student, why are you even asking this question? Just look around and you can see that people don't stand. So obviously, there's no reason to stand. Now you want to know why we don't stand? I'll explain it. But so that's the answer to you, Mel. So certainly there is room for people to, if they wish, to continue sitting. If they want to stand, they can stand as well. But it's not a mistake or it's not a false minhag. Either it's al pi hari or it's just that's the minhag Yisrael. Let me take the questions quickly.
Mark,
And yes,
as I pointed out to Chaim when he was going to publish this article,
yeah,
we are the first generation with no grandparents.
yeah, you mentioned that once. Yeah, that's an
And
important point. Yeah.
that's a very important point of where we went to the books.
But there's something else as well. Even if we had grandparents, it could be, our grandparents were Sheni Yidden, but they weren't Talmidei Chachamim. So now when you go to yeshiva and you become a Talmud Chacham, but Rechaim does think that the Holocaust is what, well, because if we're still in Kovno and everyone is doing the minhag for 500 years, you don't change it. But we're uprooted, then but I think you still need to put the fact in that our children are much more learned than the grandparents ever were. And even without the change from Europe to America, you could still see how it could develop that maybe my grandparents were very good Jews, but they didn't know so much halacha, maybe. So I think that's important. But yes, thank you for that. Hadassah, Poland, every country in Europe has a kosher list. Um, Yaakov says, your grandson came back from Eretz Yisrael last year through Frankfurt. He told me that his friend gave him the name Kosher app. Using the app, he was able to eat very well. Yes, it's called I have it on my phone, but you have to pay for it each month. So I only sign up for it when I go to Europe. It's called Kosher Scan. And I wasn't sure if it was accepted, but it's from one of the Musmachim from the Rabbinic Seminary Berlin. That's more of the right-wing Orthodox in Germany. And I asked one of the people who teach at the yeshiva there, and he says that, yeah, most people use it. Now, why was I unsure? Because basically it's only on ingredients. It's the old American approach. It's the Rav body approach. So in America, we don't hold of ingredients, and they can give you all the reasons why not. But this is only based on ingredients and what he's looked into. But so I can tell you that most from Jews in Europe, in my experience, and use this. Okay, maybe they'll tell you if you're in a place like Germany, you can rely on it because you don't have hashgachas. But in America, that's where Rav Henkin held that since we have hashgachas, we shouldn't rely on that. But yes, it's a very, very helpful tool. David says, "Do Shimon Shkop live in Washington Heights during the year? He lived as Rosh Yeshiva." No, he was never living in Washington Heights. I think he lived down in the Lower East Side, I believe. Um, Revel studied our Shimon and tells per making of a gadol. Yes, and you will see something for making of a gadol next class, which doesn't reflect so well on Revel vis-a-vis Rav Shimon. So we will, which goes back to the time and tells. I think it's probably a Baba Misa. In fact, I know it's a Baba Misa. the way it's described because the dates are completely off. I'm very surprised that Nosson Kamenetsky made this very simple error. And David says, in the right wing world, the moniker of Yoshever Boston is used to distinguish him from Yosheber of Soloveitchik, of the son of the Brisker of. Yeah, no, they call him the Bostoner. They do things like that, but never before have you ever seen on the front cover of a book, Av Baston of Boston. It's trying to remove him from the institution he was connected with. Look, they did it. I wrote about this on this forum blog. They did this with Irv Gorelick. They've done it with many other figures who've taught there. They try to totally remove them from what's their main Torah connection. David says, was Cyrus Adler related to Morris Adler, who's named by the seminary? No, as far as I know, no relation. Adler is a well-known name. Yes, murdered by a disgruntled congregant. Rav Adler's grandson is your neighbor in Beit Shemesh. That I didn't know about the neighbor. I've spoken about Rabbi Adler many times because in the context that he's one of the authors together with Jacob Agus, Talmud Muvagar, Moshe Soloveitchik, and he's also a Yeshiva College graduate. His father was not a Yeshiva College graduate. I don't know where he went to college. His father was Rav Yosef Adler, who was head of MTJ. Rav Yosef Adler, Rav Moshe is brought in second to him. Rav Yosef Adler dies swimming off Far Rockaway or Coney Island. He drowns. And because of that, Rav Moshe becomes head of MTJ. So his son, this was an era when best and the brightest of many of the Orthodox went to the seminary. His son, Morris Adler, is one of the people who signs the responsum permitting driving to shul on Shabbos for the conservative movement. And then, as you pointed out, he's murdered. I wouldn't say a disgruntled congregant. I would say more like a deranged congregant, right during the middle of a bar mitzvah service. And they renamed the highway right in front of him, Rabbi Morris Adler. And S says, ironically, Moshe Mordechai Shkop ended up in America, yes, where his daughter married Rav Zelig Epstein. Rav Shimon lived in Borough Park for a time. Ah, okay, I did not know that. And David says Rav Shlomo Zalman could have been relying on the Ramah and the Darchei Moshe that quotes the Maril. He would remain seated. Yeah, but that's not the. Oh, you're saying about Vayvarech David. Okay. No, he says, so he would remain seated even during Vayvarech David. The Maril. Okay, yeah, I didn't know that. And Dov says, or David Krumglass of Ner Yisrael, the Mashgiach, would tell us when we go home and daven in a shul where everyone is sitting during Kriyas Torah, we should not stand and be different than everyone else. It's interesting he said that because today I sort of feel like no one gets offended. It's no Lucy do. I mean, all the chuvos from like 50, 60 years ago would say that you can't put, like, we're going to have Chol Moed soon, that you can't put tefillin on in a shul if the minhag there is not to wear tefillin Chol Moed or vice. You can't do that. It's Lucy to do. Maybe in Israel there's still such a concept, but in America, no one really. It's a free for all today, and again, Rav David Krungas, who's sitting? You could say to him, well, the people are sitting are balabatim, so they're not yeshiva people. If yeshiva people were sitting, it's one thing, but balabatim. But I happen to be very impressed by the fact that he would say that you go back and you're supposed to do like the local community does. Um, if only that was the case today, that they listen to the local Rav. Usually, after being in a yeshiva with Gadol Yisrael, the local rabbi usually, he's not a Gadol Yisrael. Sometimes he could be, but most of the time he's a Rav. He's a social worker. He's a planner. He's done everything a rabbi needs to do. And therefore, sometimes the yeshiva students don't give the Rav the proper respect and don't follow the psukim. So that's something that our community could do better on. But okay, listen, all it's been great so far, but we're not done, and we got fascinating stuff to come. God willing, in 2 weeks, when if any of you are down in Florida and you see me, please introduce yourself. I'm sure we'll have some listeners with us, and I wish everyone a wonderful Pesach, especially those of us in Eretz Yisrael. David from Beit Shemesh, we saw what happened with the rocket a few days ago, and you should know my son. We're trying to get him a flight back because he can't be out of there. It's Eretzeinu Akdosha. But God willing, by the time we meet in 2 weeks, things will have improved, and we'll see some clarity on this. So, Rabbi Kelman, any final words?
Yeah, I've mentioned a few times that Rav Schechter told us you're not allowed to stand if the rabbi is sitting. for Kriyas Torah.
Well, the rabbis always sit. Generally, I should say generally, the
No,
rabbis
lots
do
of
sit.
rabbis. I mean, some
Uh,
stand, but if the rabbi's sitting for Kriyas Torah, you cannot stand.
okay, well,
That's a
generally, I go
lack
to
of
lots
kavod
of
Rav.
shows. It's
Sorry?
very rare to have the rabbi standing in any of the shows I've been to.
I don't know. I would not say that's true, but okay, maybe we have in different shuls. I mean, we do
We
have
do
in
indeed.
different
Yeah.
shuls, but okay, you
I mean,
get
why should
around
the
a little
rabbi
bit more
stand?
than I
Okay,
do. I'm
if the
sorry.
rabbi stands, it's another problem because the rabbi's standing, none of the balabatim are. Then the balabatim are, I think they have to stand, and that's a tircha de tzibura for the balabatim. So even
I
if the
don't
rabbi
know
wants to
that
stand,
that I
I
don't know
think
if
most
that's true.
rabbis would say he shouldn't stand just because then the balabatim would feel they have to stand, and that's a
No, I
tircha.
don't think people today care like that. I don't know. I don't know if that's true either. But anyways,
Well, I don't know, David. You said Rav Soloveitchik sat down. Do you remember, Nikki, if Rav Soloveitchik sat down during Kriyas Torah?
Uh, no, I honestly, I'm trying to think. Um, I
Rosh Soloveitchik
remember.
stood for Kriyas Torah. As a matter of fact, when he was older and he couldn't stand, then he felt he had to do HaTorah Sidorim
So,
because
okay, so we have Edrod Ne'amana that he stood. But David, did Rav Lichtenstein stand? The Shabbos I was there at Gush. I was only there one Shabbos. Rav Amital was there. He sat. I
Rav
noted that.
Lichtenstein stood up. He felt like the Ramban that it's a reenactment of Har Sinai, whereas the Rav felt it's Talmud Torah and one should sit.
So all the Talmidim, yeah, but we have Edrod Ne'amana that the Rav did stand. Did so? Did the students all stand at Gush? Because if
Most of
Rav
them,
Lichtenstein,
yes,
yeah, yeah,
yes.
okay.
and then when I was in Kush, the people didn't. I mean, I was also there visit. I'll ask my kids. They went to Kush. I have to if they all their kids were there the last couple of years of visiting Zoik, but maybe he wasn't well back then. I don't know, but anyways, I don't know now for Moshe Lichtenstein stand or sit. Do you know?
I'm pretty sure he stands. I can find that for you.
Okay.
Listen, that's only a minhag, but the thing about the brachos, they really see it as more of like an obligation, like a more of halacha to stand. So it's a completely separate thing. Yeah. So you could see the idea of standing from the middle, but sitting for the Kriyas Torah.
Okay, I
Okay.
asked Kenny Whitman, also a Maimonides person,
Yeah.
and he said the Rav stood for all Torah reading from the beginning to the end, whatever that means. I don't know what that implies anything about the ben gavra gavra. That's what
No,
Kenny.
that means he stood for the whole thing. Yeah, yeah, until after, I guess.
Okay.
Okay. So, David, you have to investigate that about what he said. Okay, so we have Al Pishnei Edim that we can establish this.
Which
Okay.
way, one way?
Because I
Yeah.
always heard it was the name of the Rav who said that it's a reenactment of Mamad Har Sinai.
Listen,
That's
when I
where
was
should
with the
stand.
Rav,
The
when
Rav
I was
said
with
that.
the Rav couldn't stand. We did Kriyas Torah for him. This is in the Kollel, but he was not physically able to stand. The only way he can get back and forth to the car was we helped him. I went in the car with Chaim Jachter, but he was already, that was physically, so I'm not bringing any judgment from that. But we have testimony here that he stood, so very good.
Okay, second your wishes, Chag Sameach, everybody, and everybody should be well. We should hear good news. As I mentioned, tomorrow morning, 9:30 a.m. Eastern, 4:30 in Israel. I'll be giving Divrei Torah for the Seder. Everybody's invited. And then we take a break till next Monday night when Rabbi Stephen Gottlieb, a week tonight, will be giving a Parshat Shavua and Parshat Shmini. Because otherwise it gets forgotten, the Parsha. You know, Pesach ends at least here on Thursday night. David, you get an extra day to prepare Shtein Mikra, but whatever. Okay, I'll ask his grandson in Beit Shemesh, right? Rabbi Lichtenstein, yeah. Yeah, okay, very good. Okay, everybody, Laila Tov and Besorah Tova and all good things. Okay, be well, everybody.
Sameach. Good
Chag
night. Thank you.
Sameach, Chag Sameach. Okay, yeah, be well.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.